After my sister's funeral, I found her box. At first, it felt like a gift, letters full of sisterly love and old memories. Instead, they ended with a confession so dark it split my family in two. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stay with me because this story twists darker than anything you could imagine. Stay with me because this story twists darker than anything you could imagine. I never thought grief could feel both heavy and hollow at the same time, but that's what it was like after my sister's funeral. The house was quieter than I'd ever known it, every corner echoing with absence. I wandered from room to room, touching things she once touched, almost afraid that if I stopped moving, the reality of her being gone would catch me too suddenly. It was while sorting through her belongings in the attic, the place where dust clings to time itself, that I noticed a wooden box tucked behind an old trunk. It was small but weighty, with a brass lock that looked more symbolic than secure. Something about it pulled me closer, as though it had been waiting for me all along. My hands trembled as I lifted it down, the wood cold against my palms. I thought it might be filled with jewelry or keepsakes, maybe photographs she hadn't wanted anyone else to see. Instead, inside were envelopes, dozens of them, each one addressed to me in her handwriting yet never mailed. My name written again and again, as if she had been speaking directly to me in secret. I sat on the floor, knees stiff, heart racing, and opened the first letter. Her words spilled out warm and familiar, full of childhood recollections, gratitude for my presence in her life, admissions of her fears when she was younger. Felt like a private diary meant only for me. I found myself smiling through tears, hearing her voice in every line, almost comforted by the thought that she had always carried me in her heart, even in solitude. But as I opened the next letter, the tone shifted. The sentences grew fragmented, uncertain, almost guarded, like she was circling around a confession too difficult to speak plainly. She wrote of guilt, of choices that changed everything, of nights when she couldn't sleep because the truth pressed too heavily on her chest. At first, I assumed she was talking about her own regrets in life, mistakes she had made in relationships, moments of weakness. We all carry secrets like that, don't we? But something in the phrasing made me pause. She wrote, I wanted to protect you, but protecting you meant deceiving you. One day the truth will come for both of us. The air seemed to thicken around me, dust motes swirling in the dim light from the attic window. My hands shook as I reached for the next envelope, desperate and terrified in equal measure. That letter began almost tenderly again, like she was afraid to break me with her words. She told me I had always trusted her, leaned on her, believed in her wisdom. Then in one stark line she shattered that comfort. There's something you never knew. Something I never let you know. I froze, eyes racing over the words, trying to find some anchor of reason. My pulse pounded as if it already knew what my mind hadn't yet accepted. And then, at the very bottom of the page, her handwriting grew darker, pressed into the paper as though she had been trembling when she wrote it. The truth was buried with your baby because I buried it. The world tilted beneath me. My breath caught in my throat so violently that I thought I might faint right there on the attic floor. What did she mean? Which baby? My daughter. The child I had raised, loved, and devoted my life to? Was she suggesting, no, it couldn't be? My mind rebelled even as dread crawled through me. The attic felt suddenly claustrophobic, the wooden beams pressing in from every side. I clutched the letter so tightly it crumpled in my hands. I wanted to run, to slam the box shut and never look again, to pretend none of it existed. But curiosity and terror are twin flames. You cannot extinguish one without feeding the other. Had my entire life, the very foundation of my family, been built on a lie she carried in silence for decades? So why reveal it only after death? And why in this way, letters hidden away waiting for me to stumble upon them like a trap? I couldn't stop asking myself questions, each one cutting deeper. What truth had she buried? What role had she played in it? And what did it mean for the daughter I thought was mine, the daughter who was my world? I sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by silence but consumed by noise in my own head. Every memory, every milestone, every lullaby I had ever sung came rushing back in a torrent of doubt. If my sister had taken something from me, if she had stolen truth at the most fragile moment of my life, Then what was left of the story I believed was mine? The box still sat half full beside me, more letters waiting like ghosts of confessions not yet read. My body begged me to stop, to leave them sealed, but my soul knew there was no turning back. Once a crack appears in the foundation, the whole house eventually shifts. And in that moment, as the storm outside rattled the windows, I realized my life as I had known it was no longer intact. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear me, "What did you do, Margaret?" Saying her name out loud made the betrayal feel sharper, more personal. My sister, the woman I had trusted most, had left me with a riddle wrapped in grief, one that would change everything. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I went from mourning my sister to uncovering a secret that shattered my family in ways I never imagined. Because what I found inside that wooden box, it was not just paper and ink. It was the unraveling of my entire life. I wish I could tell you that I put the box away, that I closed the lid and walked down from that attic, determined never to let my sister's words poison the life I had built. But the truth is, I couldn't stop myself. My hands kept reaching for the next envelope, as though my entire body already knew what my mind wasn't ready to face. The paper felt heavier this time, as if it carried not just ink but decades of guilt pressed into every line. Her words began gently again, almost apologetically, but they quickly twisted into something darker. She wrote about the day my daughter was born. I had remembered it as both the happiest and the most terrifying moment of my life, but in her letters, Margaret painted a picture I could barely recognize. She said my baby hadn't cried, that there had been panic in the delivery room, hushed voices, a doctor who avoided my eyes. She wrote, asterisk, "I couldn't bear to let you see the truth. I couldn't let you break." At first I thought she was exaggerating or worse, confused. But as I read further, my stomach dropped. She claimed that my baby, my daughter, had been stillborn, and that she, in her desperation to protect me, had stepped in. She described speaking to the nurses, using the weight of our family's name and her own connections to convince them. A young unwed mother had delivered a child that same night, a child she couldn't or wouldn't keep. Margaret had arranged it so that when I left that hospital, I carried that infant in my arms instead of my own. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe. The attic walls seemed to press in closer and my vision blurred. Stillborn. Switched. Stolen truth. Could that even be possible? For years, I had lived with the image of my daughter's tiny face resting against my chest, her eyes blinking up at me as if recognizing me, claiming me. How could Margaret dare to tell me that moment had belonged to someone else? But then the inconsistencies I had always brushed aside came rushing back like shadows I'd ignored in daylight. I remembered the nurse who had refused to meet my gaze when she handed me my baby. The paperwork that had been oddly delayed, explained away as a clerical issue. I remembered asking why the bracelet around my daughter's wrist looked different from the one I had seen them prepare earlier, and being told not to worry about small mix-ups. I had been exhausted, fragile, desperate to hold hope in my arms. And so I let those cracks in the story fade into the background, telling myself that love was enough to smooth over details that didn't add up. Margaret's letter didn't allow me to hide anymore. She wrote, asterisk, "You would have fallen apart if I told you. You would have withered. I gave you a daughter because I couldn't bear to watch you sink into despair." Asterisk, her words were meant to sound noble, perhaps even merciful. But to me they felt like theft. She had stolen my right to grieve, stolen my right to know the truth about my own child, stolen my choice in the most intimate moment of my life. I held the letter so tightly that the paper tore between my fingers. Anger surged through me, but so did something far more complicated. Love. Because even as my heart shattered under the weight of betrayal, another truth pulsed louder in my chest. Whatever Margaret had done, whatever deception had been crafted in that hospital, the girl I raised was still my daughter. She was the child I had sung lullabies to at 3 a.m, the child whose scraped knees I kissed, the child for whom I sacrificed every ounce of myself so she could have more than I did. Blood or no blood, she was mine in every way that mattered. But the questions would not stop. Did my daughter ever sense it, even unconsciously, that she was not my flesh and blood? Was there a reason she had grown colder with me over the years, sharper in her words, quicker to dismiss me? Had Margaret's secret poisoned us long before I even knew it existed? I sat there in that attic, the letters spilling out of the box like a confession too heavy to contain, and I found myself crying for two daughters at once. The one I had never known and the one I thought I knew but suddenly feared I had never truly had. Was motherhood undone by biology? Or was it proven by decades of sleepless nights, of sacrifices no one else had witnessed, of love that had been unconditional even when it was unreturned? I wanted to believe the latter. I wanted to believe that the bond one had with my daughter was unbreakable, that no truth could rewrite what we had lived together. And yet, beneath that conviction, doubt gnawed at me. Because if she were to learn this, would she see my love as enough? Or would she see her life as a lie? Margaret had written these words years ago, and yet she had kept them hidden, never daring to place them in my hands while she was alive. Perhaps she had known the chaos they would unleash. Perhaps she had feared that telling me would destroy the family more thoroughly than silence ever could. And now here I was, staring at her confession after her death, left to carry the wreckage alone. I pressed the letters to my chest, rocking slightly like I had when my daughter was a baby, as if motion alone could soothe an ache too deep for words. But the ache only sharpened with each passing minute. Because the more I thought about it, the more I knew there was no going back. The truth had been written, and once seen, it could not be unseen. My sister had stolen my grief, but now she had given me a new kind of grief in its place. Grief for the life I thought was mine, grief for the foundation of my motherhood, grief for the daughter who might never forgive me once she knew. I whispered to the empty attic as if speaking to Margaret across the veil. Why did you do this to me? Why didn't you trust me with the truth? But silence answered back, heavy and final. And in that silence one thought grew louder than all the rest. I would have to tell my daughter. And when I did, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. For days I walked around with Margaret's letters folded tightly in my pocket, as if keeping them close could somehow help me carry their weight. I tried to imagine living with the secret silently, letting it die with me, pretending that nothing had changed. But every time I looked at Anna, every time I heard her voice calling me mother, I felt like I was standing on a fault line that was ready to split beneath us both. The truth burned too heavy to contain. Secrets are poisons, and once they are uncovered they either eat you alive or they are spoken out loud. I chose to speak. I told myself I would do it gently. That love could cradle the truth in a way that might soften the blow. I invited Anna over for tea, hoping the ordinary ritual might anchor us before the storm. She came in distracted, scrolling through her phone, barely noticing the way my hands trembled as I poured the water. I studied her face, the same face I had kissed 1,000 times when she was small, the face I had sworn to protect. How do you tell someone that their entire life rests on a hidden fracture? How do you tell a daughter that she is yours in every way except blood? I began with my sister's death, how I had found a box she had hidden away, how inside it were letters addressed to me. Anna's brow furrowed, her curiosity piqued. I told her about the first letter, the warmth and nostalgia. And then I told her about the shift, the confession that my baby, my firstborn, had been stillborn. My voice cracked when I told her that Margaret had arranged everything, that she had made sure I went home with another infant, a child abandoned that very night. I reached for her hand and whispered, "But Anna, listen to me. It doesn't change anything. You're my daughter. You are the child I carried in my heart even if not in my womb. Every choice I've made, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it was always for you. My love has never been conditional on blood." I wanted her to cry, to let me hold her, to understand that this was not a rejection but an affirmation of the bond we had built. But instead her face twisted into something I had never seen before, fury so raw it made me recoil. She snatched her hand away and spat out words that sliced through me like knives. So all this time I was just a replacement? A stand-in for a child who never even lived. Her voice shook, rising with each word. My whole life is a lie. Every smile, every hug. It wasn't for me. It was for some fantasy of the baby you lost. No, Anna, I begged, tears spilling down my cheeks. You don't understand. I didn't know. I only learned now, just as you're learning. To me you were never a substitute. You were always my real daughter. But she wasn't listening. Anger consumed her, pulling her further away with each breath. She accused me of complicity, of playing along with Margaret's scheme, of raising her as a child of convenience rather than out of genuine love. Her words cracked open the deepest fear I had never dared to name, that all my years of devotion would somehow be erased by one revelation. "You should have told me the moment you knew," she screamed. "Instead you kept living this lie, letting me believe I belonged when I never did. Do you know what that does to a person? To realize you were never meant to exist in this family at all." I tried to reach her again, pleading with her to see the truth of my heart. "Anna, everything I've done was for you. You are not unwanted. You are not unloved. You are my daughter in every way that matters." But the more I spoke, the more she pulled away. It was as if my words were gasoline on a fire that refused to die down. She stood, trembling with rage, her eyes flashing with betrayal. And then she said the words that broke me more than Margaret's letters ever could. "I'll never forgive you. Not for this. Not ever." The room went silent after that, except for the sound of her footsteps pounding against the floor as she stormed toward the door. I followed her, begging, reaching out like I had when she was a child trying to run away in the middle of a tantrum. But this wasn't a tantrum. This was a fracture that I feared could never be mended. She slammed the door behind her, and the echo of it rang in my chest like a death knell. I sank into the chair, staring at the teacups still steaming on the table. The house was quiet, but inside me there was nothing but noise. Her words replaying, her anger searing, her rejection stabbing deeper than I thought possible. For 72 years I had endured grief, loneliness, loss. But nothing compared to the feeling of my daughter, my child whom I had loved with everything I had, looking me in the eye and declaring that she would never forgive me. The letters lay upstairs in their wooden box, heavy with truths I hadn't yet read. But for now it wasn't the paper that weighed on me. It was the absence of my daughter, the empty space where love used to live. And yet beneath the pain, a cold unease began to stir. Because Anna's anger wasn't just heartbreak. It was dangerous. I had seen it in her eyes, the way they burned not with sadness but with blame. She wasn't grieving the lie, she was weaponizing it. As I sat there in the silence of my home, I realized with a chill that the secret had not only shattered my family, it had cracked something inside my daughter. And I could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of what her fury might unleash. The days after Anna's outburst stretched into weeks, each one heavier than the last. At first I thought she simply needed time to process, that her anger would burn out like a storm that eventually passes. But instead of calming, she grew colder. The warmth in her voice vanished. The affectionate hugs, the casual touches, even the smallest gestures of familiarity, all of it disappeared. In their place was a brittle politeness that felt sharper than outright cruelty. She would ask me if I'd eaten, but the words came through clenched teeth. She would pour me tea, but her eyes never softened, watching me like a stranger she'd been forced to entertain. I began to notice small things, details that at first seemed insignificant. Trinkets from my study went missing. A framed photograph of my late husband, a brooch my sister once gave me, my reading glasses. At first I assumed I'd misplaced them. But when I asked Anna if she'd seen them, she would tilt her head, feigning innocence, her lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Maybe you're just forgetting things, Mother," she would say, her tone dripping with false concern. The implications stung more than her words, that I was losing my mind, that I could no longer trust myself. At night, I would hear whispers echoing down the hallway. Anna on the phone, speaking too low for me to catch the words, but her laughter would occasionally pierce through the silence. It wasn't the laughter of joy. It was sharp, mocking, the kind of laugh that makes your stomach knot because you know it's at your expense. Sometimes I would hear another voice too, her husband Mark's deep tone murmuring in agreement. The two of them plotting in the shadows, sharing a secret language of disdain that excluded me entirely. The air in my house grew heavy with hostility. Every room I entered seemed to still when I walked in, like they had been speaking about me just moments before. Meals became unbearable. Anna would set my plate down with a polite smile, but the scrape of the fork against the dish, the way she watched me eat, made me feel like I was on trial. Mark barely spoke to me anymore. When he did, it was curt, transactional, as though I were nothing more than a burden housed under his roof. I started keeping to my room more often, the four walls offering a kind of safety that the rest of the house denied me. But even there I could feel the shift. The door that had once been a barrier began to feel like a flimsy sheet of paper, incapable of protecting me from what was happening beyond it. Some nights I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, convinced I could feel eyes on me. My own home, once my sanctuary, now felt like enemy territory. The betrayal of Margaret's letters had cracked the foundation of my world, but Anna's transformation was shattering it entirely. She no longer looked at me as her mother. There was no grief in her eyes, no longing for repair. Only something darker. Something that sent a chill down my spine every time her gaze lingered a second too long. I began to wonder what she and Mark spoke about late at night. I would hear fragments, "She'll slip soon," or "Just wait a little longer." And though I couldn't be certain, the words pressed into me with a growing dread. Were they trying to convince themselves that I was unraveling? Or worse, were they planning to make sure of it? I tried to reason with myself, to dismiss the fear as paranoia, the side effect of grief and too many secrets piling up at once. But then I started noticing deliberate patterns. My medicine bottles, which I kept carefully lined on the nightstand, were occasionally out of order. A glass of water I had set down would taste slightly bitter the next day. I caught Mark once in my room, claiming he was just checking if I needed anything, but his eyes flicked toward the pill bottles before he left. It was then I realized that what Margaret had done decades ago, the manipulation, the secrets, the lies, had sown a poison in my family that was still blooming. And it wasn't just angry. She wasn't simply lashing out in grief. No, her anger had curdled into something far more dangerous. I began to fear that she wasn't only punishing me with silence, coldness, or distance. She wanted to punish me with something irreversible. The daughter I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for was beginning to feel like a stranger. Not just a stranger, but an enemy. And the more I tried to reach her, the more she recoiled, building walls higher and higher until there was no room left for reconciliation. I found myself checking the locks at night, something I hadn't done in years. I began writing notes to myself, what time I had taken my medication, when I had last eaten, where I placed my belongings, because a terrifying thought had started to take root. What if Anna was trying to create the illusion that I was losing my mind? What if she was deliberately moving objects, tampering with things, eroding my sense of trust in myself? That was the moment I realized the battlefield wasn't outside. It was within the walls of my own home. And the enemy wasn't a stranger at the door. It was my own flesh and blood. I sat in my room one night, clutching Margaret's last unopened letters, listening to the muffled voices of Anna and Mark below. And for the first time, I let myself whisper the thought that had been clawing at me all along. My daughter's fury wasn't just dangerous, it might be deadly. And if I didn't prepare myself, I would be caught defenseless in a war I never asked for. That night I couldn't sleep. My body ached with unease, my mind replaying Margaret's letters, Anna's furious words, and the chilling silence that had settled over the house. The clock on my nightstand ticked louder than usual, every second stretching like an eternity. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, almost cautious, but unmistakable. They echoed through the hallway, soft against the wooden floor, drawing closer to my room. My chest tightened. Instinct told me not to move, not to give myself away. I steadied my breathing, letting it rise and fall in measured rhythm, forcing my eyelids to stay heavy. The door creaked just slightly, but enough to send a shiver crawling up my spine. In the darkness, I could feel her presence before I saw it, the faint outline of Anna standing in the doorway. For a moment she didn't move. I kept my breath steady, though my heart was hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. Then I heard it, the sound of her whisper. Barely audible but sharp enough to cut through me. Just a few more hours and this ends. Terror gripped every part of me. I wanted to scream, to leap from the bed and lock myself away, but fear held me captive. I remained still, feigning sleep, knowing that one wrong twitch could reveal that I'd heard her. She lingered, her shadow stretching across the room before turning away. The faint squeak of the floorboards marked her retreat down the hallway. I lay frozen, straining to catch every sound. Then came the clink of glass, the muffled shuffle of items being moved in the kitchen. My pulse spiked. I knew those sounds. For years I had kept my medicine in the cabinet by the sink, bottles carefully lined and labeled. And now I could hear them being handled. Twisted open, shaken, tampered with. My body trembled under the covers, a helplessness I had never felt before washing over me. It's one thing to fear the world outside your door. It's another to know that the danger lives within your home, carrying your blood, calling you mother. The truth was no longer guesswork, no longer a possibility I dreaded in silence. It was real. My daughter, the child I had carried in my arms, fed at my breast, sat awake through fevers and heartbreaks was plotting my death. The thought lodged itself so deep it almost suffocated me. I tried to cling to reason. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe I was imagining it. But my gut told me otherwise, and that quiet, unmistakable clink of bottles sealed it. And it wasn't just angry. She wasn't just broken by the truth of her birth. She wanted me gone. Permanently. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every sound magnified, every creak of the old house setting my nerves on edge. My eyes fixed on the ceiling, but my mind raced ahead, calculating possibilities, rehearsing escape routes. The woman who once sought nothing but reconciliation with her daughter now found herself contemplating survival under her own roof. When the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, I finally moved. Slowly, carefully, I went to the kitchen. The bottles were back in place, lined neatly, almost too neatly. My hand trembled as I picked one up, unscrewing the cap. The smell was faintly different. The pills inside looked just a shade off in color, as though something had been added, altered. I poured two into my palms, staring at them until my vision blurred. Would swallowing these mean the end of me? I set them down and pressed both hands against the counter, trying to steady the quake inside me. It was no longer a question of if Anna would hurt me, but when. And if I continued to play the obedient, oblivious mother, she would succeed. The betrayal struck harder than any physical wound. Margaret had deceived me with her baby switch, a deception rooted in fear but dressed as protection. Now Anna carried out her own deception, not out of love but out of rage. It felt as if the poison of one sister's lie had seeped through decades, corrupting the very child I had raised. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to cry until there were no tears left. But I didn't. Instead, I stood in that kitchen, clutching the counter until my knuckles went white, and whispered to myself the only truth I knew in that moment. If I wanted to live, I would need to outsmart her. The fear was still there. It coursed through me like fire in my veins. But beneath it, a hard layer of resolve began to form. I could not undo the past. I could not erase Margaret's letters nor Anna's fury. But I could control one thing. I would not hand them my death on a silver platter. When I returned to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bottles on the nightstand. To Anna, they were her weapon. To me, they were her undoing. I realized in that moment that I had a choice. I could remain the prey, waiting silently for the inevitable. Or I could begin shifting the ground beneath her feet, slowly, carefully, until the trap she thought she had set for me closed around her instead. That night in the shadows, listening to her whisper those words, I felt a terror I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I also felt something else, something deeper, something almost defiant. He thought I was asleep, blind, unaware. She thought she could take everything from me without resistance. She had no idea I was wide awake and ready to fight back. The night it finally happened, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. I had grown used to the rhythm of Anna's footsteps in the evenings, the creak of cupboard doors, the faint clinking of glasses in the kitchen. But that night the silence stretched out like a warning. My instincts, sharpened over sleepless weeks, told me something was about to break. When Anna finally came in, she was carrying my nightly drink. A glass of warm milk, the same routine she'd insisted on since I'd fallen ill, the same ritual that had once seemed caring but now felt like a countdown. She placed it gently on my nightstand, her voice too sweet, too rehearsed. "Drink this, mother. You need your strength." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. I lifted the glass, my hand deliberately steady. For a moment I let the cool rim rest against my lips. My throat tightened with the weight of every suspicion. Then I tilted the glass just enough to wet my lips, keeping the liquid hidden in my mouth. As she watched, I gave a convincing swallow, the performance of a lifetime. She nodded, satisfied. When she turned to adjust the blanket at the foot of my bed, I leaned slightly to the side, spitting the milk into the tissue I had kept ready in my hand. I tucked it quickly under the sheet, my face the picture of frail gratitude. "Thank you, Anna," I whispered. "You take such good care of me." The words burned my tongue, but they bought me time. She left the room with her usual soft steps, but I didn't close my eyes. I lay still, ears straining, every muscle taut. Hours passed in crawling silence until I heard them again, her footsteps returning, lighter this time, almost hesitant. My breath caught as the door creaked open. Through the thin veil of my lashes, I could see her silhouette standing in the doorway, unmoving as if weighing her next move. And then she came closer. Slowly. Deliberately. Her shadow stretched across the floor, gliding until it hovered at the edge of my bed. In her hands I saw it, the pillow. Gripped tightly, trembling slightly, yet held with the intent of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind. My heart thundered so violently I thought it might betray me. But I kept my breathing even, steady, the same act I had perfected in all these nights of pretending. She raised the pillow just enough for the outline to blot out the faint light from the hallway. My skin prickled with the nearness of death, the realization that the child I had nurtured through life now stood poised to smother me into silence. But before she could lower it, I flicked on the lamp. The sudden light flooded the room, startling her so badly she froze mid-motion. Our eyes locked, mine burning with the knowledge I had carried for weeks, hers wide with shock that I was not asleep, not blind, not unaware. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady, sharper than it had been in years. The words cut through the fragile facade like a knife. For a moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the ragged sound of her breathing. Then the mask shattered. Rage twisted her face, fury replacing the sweetness she had worn like a costume for so long. "You don't know what it's been like," she screamed. "You lied to me my whole life. You replaced me with some dead child's shadow. You don't deserve anything. You don't even deserve me." Her voice shook the walls, but I did not flinch. "And you think murder will change that?" I asked. My calmness seemed to unnerve her more than if I had cried. She clutched the pillow tighter, her knuckles white, her whole body trembling. "I was never yours," she spat. "I was never wanted. I was just the consolation prize you kept because you had nothing else." Her words sliced deeper than any knife, but I held my ground. "You may not be mine by blood, Anna, but every choice I made was for you. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night. And this is how you repay it." The tension snapped. She let out a scream so primal it made me shiver. She lunged forward, but her fury was clumsy, her movements wild. I shoved the pillow aside with a strength I didn't know I still possessed, scrambled from the bed and ran. My heart pounded as my bare feet hit the cold floorboards, my only thought survival. Behind me her voice echoed, hoarse and broken. "You ruined my life. You stole everything from me." I didn't look back. I fled down the hall, clutching the railing as I descended the stairs, my breath ragged, my body fueled by sheer adrenaline. For the first time I truly understood that the home I had built, the walls that had sheltered me, were no longer mine. They had become a cage of betrayal, and I had just escaped its snapping jaws. By the time I reached the front door, I was trembling uncontrollably. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, the echo of her screams still vibrating in my ears. When the cold night air hit my face, it felt like freedom and terror all at once. I stepped into the darkness, leaving behind the fragile shell of family that had collapsed completely in a single night. That confrontation marked the end of everything I had once believed unshakable. The daughter I had raised was gone, consumed by rage and betrayal. And as I stood under the moonlit sky, my chest heaving, one truth seared itself into my heart. Survival would demand not just strength but a reckoning. In the days after the confrontation, the house felt like a tomb. I moved through it like a ghost, haunted by echoes of footsteps, fragments of screams, and the shadow of a daughter I no longer recognized. The walls, once filled with laughter and life, now pressed in on me with unbearable silence. I thought I had reached the end of the unraveling, that nothing more could be taken from me, no deeper truth left to pierce what remained of my heart. I was wrong. It happened while I was gathering the letters, those fragile sheets of paper that had already demolished the world I thought I knew. I had stacked them neatly, intending to return the box to the attic where it belonged, but one thin envelope slipped loose, tucked against the wooden bottom as though hiding from discovery. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, already bracing myself because if the earlier letters had been storms, I feared this one would be lightning. The handwriting was shakier than the others, as if my sister had written it in great haste or fear. It began with apologies, words she had repeated so often they no longer carried meaning. But then came the confession that stopped my breath. Years after the switch at the hospital, Anna's biological mother had come looking. A young woman, desperate, eyes hollow with regret, had begged for news of the child she had left behind. My sister had met her at the door. And she had turned her away. She wrote, "I told her to leave and never come back. I couldn't risk it, not after everything. I couldn't let her destroy the life you built." I read those lines again and again, the words blurring through tears. My chest ached with a new kind of betrayal sharper than the rest, because it did not just rewrite my past, it rewrote Anna's too. For years I had believed that fate had handed me one cruel blow, the death of a child, and one mercy, the gift of another. Now I knew that mercy had been stolen from someone else, and that person might still be alive somewhere, carrying the wound of a child lost forever. The question lodged itself deep in my mind and would not let go. If Anna had been raised by her true mother, would she have grown into someone different? Would she have been softer, happier, whole? Or would the darkness that erupted in her here have bloomed there as well? Was it the blood in her veins that made her lash out with such fury? Or was it the secret itself, the lie layered into every brick of her childhood? Nature or nurture? Which betrayal had condemned us both? I walked out into the garden with the letter still clutched in my hand, desperate for air. The roses were in bloom, their petals wide and fragrant, a cruel contrast to the decay inside me. I sat on the old stone bench, the same one where Anna had once played with dolls at my feet, where I had once believed that love was enough to anchor us forever. Now the bench felt like a memorial to all that had died, not just my sister, not just the truth, but the fragile illusion of family I had built across decades. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the young woman who had come to my sister's door all those years ago. I wondered if she still woke at night thinking of the baby she had given up, if she would have recognized Anna's face in a crowd, if she still carried hope that someday she might find her again. I wondered what would happen if I went searching, if I placed Anna's photo in her hands and said, "This is your daughter and she is alive, but she is broken and I do not know how to fix her." Would it heal anything? Or would it only open another wound that could never close? The truth is, I will never know. That chance was stolen from us both the moment my sister shut the door on her. That choice, born of fear, perhaps even of love twisted into protection, altered the course of all our lives. It was not just a secret. It was a theft. And its cost has rippled across generations, leaving scars I cannot erase. As I sat there, the sun sinking low, I realized how hollow victory felt. Surviving Anna's fury, uncovering my sister's deception, none of it had restored what I had lost. It had only left me with pieces, jagged and sharp, cutting me every time I tried to gather them. People imagine that truth heals, that uncovering secrets sets you free. But the truth I had found did not free me. It shackled me to questions without answers, to a daughter I both loved and feared, to a past that could never be made whole. And yet, as broken as I was, a part of me still clung to the faintest thread of hope. Maybe someday Anna would understand that love is not erased by lies. Maybe the bitterness burning inside her would soften with time. Or maybe it never would. Maybe the girl I raised was lost to me forever. That too I will never know. The letter crinkled in my hands as I whispered into the air, words no one would hear but me. "You shattered my family, Claire. And you left me holding pieces that cut deeper than any blade. But the greatest cruelty is not knowing which betrayal hurt more, yours or hers." When I finally set the letter down beside me, the garden was drenched in twilight, the roses darkening into shadows. I breathed deeply, the weight of grief heavy but strangely clarifying. My story did not end with truth or justice. It ended with silence, with a question that would echo through whatever time I had left. If Anna had grown up in another home, another life, would she have been saved? Or was she always destined to break me? That question is my inheritance now. Not money, not comfort, not certainty, just the haunting riddle of what might have been. And perhaps that is the cruelest twist of all.